Good morning, everybody. Folk and Försvar is very pleased to welcome you all to this seminar this morning, where we will discuss the bilateral cooperation on defense and security matters between Brazil and Sweden. My name is Maud Holma von Heinen. I'm the Secretary General of Folk and Försvar, and I will have the pleasure to moderate this seminar this morning. Sweden and Brazil launched a strategic bilateral cooperation between the two countries in 2009. Sweden and Brazil might not be the obvious partners on issues regarding global security, but since the start of this bilateral cooperation, the two countries are developing a deepened cooperation on the matters of security and defense. Since Brazil bought JAS 39 Gripen from Sweden, the defense cooperation has deepened, and the joint development and the production will link the two countries in a cooperation for a long time forward. In this seminar, we plan to discuss the bilateral relationship between Sweden and Brazil with a certain focus on the security cooperation and as well as the countries' shared interest and common goals in foreign policy. What are the common interests in security questions between the two countries? What are the mutual benefits? And what are the challenges they are facing in this cooperation? And how do they cooperate on matters regarding global peace and security in different organizations? The seminar is broadcasted, and it is therefore very important that everyone uses the microphones. There will be time for Q&As at the end of the seminar. Please wait until the microphone will reach you and you can give your question. First of all, I would like to introduce the first speaker, Ms. Lena Bartelsson, Head of Department for Strategy and Security Policy from the Ministry of Defense in Sweden. Lena is a very well-known person to this organization as the former Secretary General, and it's a very pleasure to have you here on stage. Please, tell us about the Swedish perspective on this cooperation.
Well, thank you very much, Maud, for coming. Dear Ambassador, dear colleagues and dear friends, it is a true privilege to be here. It pleases me very much, and that is for several reasons. Representing the Swedish government and having the opportunity to talk about the cooperation between Sweden and Brazil is important. And the organization Folk och Försvar is a unique platform in informing and encouraging discussion about security and defense policy issues in Sweden. And having worked for this organization, I'm delighted to be back in a new role. Last but not least, o Brasil é país que eu conheço e que eu gosto muito. Okay, let's start. The agenda is I plan to speak for about 15 minutes and about Swedish-Brazilian relations, innovation, research and development and industry, and also government-to-government cooperation. When it comes to the Swedish-Brazilian relations, there are many years of cooperation. You can trace the Swedish-Brazilian cooperation to the 19th century, actually. The first diplomatic relations established in January 1826. And the first Swedish immigrants came to Brazil already in 1890. With the 20th century, the contacts expanded and growth in trade and deepened industry cooperation. Ericsson was established very early on, and ASEA, for example, were one of the actors behind the cable car up to the Sugarloaf mountain in Rio de Janeiro in 1912. Swedish-Brazilian Chamber of Commerce was founded already in 1953 in São Paulo. Today, we have around 200 Swedish companies that are located in Brazil, and together they employ around 70,000 persons. The major Swedish companies established for more than 100 years ago, as I said previously, so we have a long history of close ties between Sweden and Brazil when it comes to industry and private enterprises. From a Swedish security policy perspective, European and transatlantic unity is crucial. And with Brazil as a key South American actor, we can add a new dimension of our security cooperation over the Atlantic. Brazil is also a central actor in many multilateral forums, including the UN and BRICS. Brazil is a partner in advocating multilateralism, climate issues, and technology development. And we share views on the importance of reducing risks for conflict and the importance of multilateral organizations like the UN. You can definitely argue that the 21st century brings a new era with more industry cooperation and deepened security teamwork. Now, the announcement from Brazil to buy the fighter aircraft meant a boost for the Swedish-Brazilian cooperation. And in the last couple of years, we have seen how Swedish industry, academia, and government sectors have formed new approaches to bilateral cooperation. When it comes to innovation, research, and development, we cooperate on higher education at master's and PhD level and applied research in aeronautics and information technology and share resources to achieve global excellence. We also see joint technology demonstrators, bilateral cooperation on studies aimed at developing future systems and conceptual design, and also connecting innovation ecosystems in aeronautics. Swedish aeronautics research programs and funds have been directed towards Brazil. There's also an innovation center, the Swedish Brazilian Center for Research and Innovation is headquartered in the state of São Paulo, and that is a non-profit industry, academia, government guided organization that acts as an arena and mediator to connect the innovation systems of both countries. There are also innovation weeks and aeronautic workshops taking place every year. Innovation training, of course, the Swedish partners have been supporting management training, concept development courses, etc. We have seen 50 Brazilian army representatives that have been trained in Sweden and Brazil to support the army transformation. And in addition, some 60 Brazilians from 40 different organizations have visited Sweden to learn about the Swedish innovation system. We also see digital innovation, and several Swedish organizational concepts that in innovation are now set up in Brazil to connect. I wanted to tell you also about, this huge cooperation that we have within innovation, research, and development. One really boost, as I mentioned, is the Saab Gripen. When Brazil decided to buy the Saab Gripen airplane, and that was on December 2013, that the government of Brazil elected Gripen to be its next generation air fighter. The order was signed in the end of 2014, and it is 28 single-seaters and 8 two-seater aircrafts, and these will be delivered in 2019 and onwards. And these modern fighter aircraft will be in service for decades. So the Swedish-Brazilian security interest will be intertwined for the best part of this century. Now there is also a broad industrial cooperation with transfer and improvement of manufacturing and technology. With the Gripen Industrial Cooperation Program, Brazil aims to further develop its own defense industry, and Saab is working directly with industrial partners in Brazil. One of the largest aircraft producers in the world, Embraer, is a strategic partner to Saab, in this and very involved in the development of the aircraft and the systems. So lots of technology transfer, and when it comes to manufacturing, facilities for test flights and manufacturing will be set up in Brazil for the Gripen program. We also count on a number of spillover effects. A Swedish government agency Growth Analysis has evaluated the spillover effects from the industrial partnership between Sweden and Brazil to other sectors. And 3 conclusions emerge from the analysis. First, Sweden and Brazil can take advantage of each other's knowledge and industrial bases to a much greater extent than before. Second, the Gripen has potential to generate spillover effects to other parts of the economy. And third, the co-creation narrative regarding future and potential spillover is critical for the development of the partnership. Now, when it comes to government cooperation, several agreements underline the support the cooperation since the early 21st century. We have, for example, the Framework Agreement for the Defense Cooperation, Agreement on Innovative Industrial Cooperation, Cooperation Agreement between R&D funding agencies, Agreement between research institutes, a Memorandum of Understanding on Sustainable Mining, and an agreement to develop cooperation in environment, climate, and sustainability. In October 2015, Sweden and Brazil signed a strategic partnership new action plan, stressing our readiness to act in a coordinated manner to strengthen multilateralism, preservation of peace and international security, disarmament and non-proliferation, promotion for human rights and social justice, and sustainable development and environmental preservation. The strategic partnership includes 7 concrete areas: a political dialogue and cooperation in multilateral fora, trade and investments, bioenergy, defense, climate change and sustainable development, science, innovation and high technology, and cultural exchange and education. And there are different fora for cooperation: working groups for the MOUs on defense matters, on ongoing armed forces cooperation with the aim of engaging in mutual military education and training, political dialogue to discuss bilateral, regional, and multilateral issues on mutual interest, policy military dialogue to share and exchange information about the preservation of peace and international security, disarmament, and non-proliferation. The latter is a policy military dialogue. It's called the 2+2 dialogue, and this includes the policy director and the head of the European Security Department and equivalents at the foreign and defense ministries from both countries, and they meet annually. And that is why I have my colleagues from Brazil here this week. Sweden recently held elections, and Brazil will go to the polls in just a few weeks. Regardless of the results, the highly valued strategic partnership between Sweden and Brazil is long-term and will remain in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Please stay for a few questions. What would you say are the results that you have seen from this cooperation in the close time being?
Well, as I mentioned, there are a number of concrete results, I would say, from the dialogues. We have these dialogues which are very important to identify areas for cooperation and so on. I mean, we already, as I mentioned, have many different kinds of cooperation on different levels, from government level to armed forces and academia. So there's so many things going on, actually.
And you mentioned that it has been a long time ongoing cooperation from the industry and cooperation and academia and such things. And how important is this cooperation for cooperations on security and policy level? Is there a necessity of one another, or do they stand alone?
I would say that the industrial cooperation is, of course, a motor in this. But there are so many good spin-off effects, and the fact that we do have bilateral meetings and so on, talking about more strategic security policy-related issues, is really, it adds lots of value for us, as Brazil is a key player in South America and also taking place in all these big multilateral fora, for example, BRICS. It really adds value for us to have this close connection with Brazil.
Okay, thank you. We will come back to these questions a little bit later, I guess. Thank you, Lena. And then I would warmly welcome our guest from Brazil, the Ambassador Alessandro Candeias, who is the Director of the Defense and Security Affairs Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil. Very welcome. You will please introduce us to the Brazilian perspective on the cooperation between Sweden and Brazil on security and defense matters. Please.
Thank you so much, Maud Alma. Thank you, Lana, Mr. Ambassador Pinta Gama. It's really a great honor for me to stay here and to participate in the seminar of Folk als Forsvar. I was very impressed when I read the profile of this seminar, of this organization, the way you raise awareness on society towards issues of security. This is very important. In Brazil, we do not have a similar seminar like this, so you are an inspiration, and I hope we can also reproduce this kind of exercise in Brazil. Next year, we'll be celebrating 10 years of our strategic partnership between Sweden and Brazil. And this, as you said, this partnership was boosted, was strengthened with the GRIP and NG program in 2015, and when this dialogue was established. The strategic dimension of our cooperation goes beyond the purely strategic and political sphere. It has concrete repercussions in the industrial and technological aspects. And although Brazil and Sweden, as this seminar points out, we form a cooperation from very far away, although we are geographically very far away, thematically and in terms of worldview, we have a tremendous convergence. And we build on this convergence of views between our two faraway countries. So although we are based on quite different historical and geopolitical backgrounds, our both countries share really similar positions on the world scene regarding especially peace, human rights, security, defense agendas. Yesterday we held our third political strategic meeting, and my idea here would be to share with you some highlights of what we discussed yesterday, just exactly to show how convergent our worldviews are. We discussed a lot about regional contexts, South America and Europe. Let me just to share with you how we view South America. Fortunately, we do not perceive any immediate military threat in our continent. Since redemocratization of Brazil 3 decades ago, we invested politically to form what we call a strategic environment of peace, security, development, and cooperation. What is our strategic environment? It's basically South America and South Atlantic. And we want these regions to remain free from any military threats, especially nuclear threats. We want all this big region to remain nuclear-free zone. Just to bear in mind some the dimensions of the country, Brazil, and of our region. Our territory is 8.5 million square kilometers. We have a borderline of 70,000 kilometers with 10 neighboring countries with no border disputes. We have a coastline of over 7,000 kilometers, just to imagine a Baltic Sea large 7.5, over 7,000 kilometers with no superpower nearby. That's our strategic environment, and that's the region of the planet we want to remain in peace and with cooperation with our developing country neighbors. We often used to say when we study international relations in Brazil that the zero-sum game does not apply to our region. I mean, the zero-sum game, as you know, when one party loses, the other gains. We do not think our own region like this. We want all the parties, all the neighbors to develop themselves. It's a win-win situation. So we thrive when our neighbors thrive. We wish our neighbors to be politically, economically, and socially stable and prosperous. This is good for our own national security. Integration and cooperation have in themselves a deterrent component. So we invest also in the regional cooperation, regional integration for the benefit of all the parties. As I said, our region has a low probability of classic state wars. Our present security challenges in the region result basically from transnational criminality and the possibility of outflows of domestic political tensions in some neighboring countries. We discussed it a little bit yesterday about the current situation in Colombia, the success of the peace process, and the challenges and difficulties in the DDR process, DDR meaning disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. We also exchanged some views on the current situation in Venezuela, an important factor of instability politically, economically, and also with important humanitarian repercussions. Brazil is highly committed to restore democracy in Venezuela, together, obviously, with the neighboring countries. In South America, we have the Lima Group, the group of political debate in favor of restoring democracy in Venezuela. We also work and discuss this issue in the framework of the Organization of American States. But especially, what is key to us is this is an internal problem, a domestic problem that must be solved by the Venezuelan population itself. By a dialogue, a constructive dialogue between the government and the opposition, and especially this is key to all the neighboring countries in South America with no foreign intervention in Venezuela. This is really important for all of us. We also shared some information on the current economic problems also in Venezuela. This is underneath the political tension, there is a very delicate and complicated economic situation. Macroeconomic background is very fragile, GDP falling, hyperinflation, decreasing oil production. So all this serves as a background, economic background that makes the social and humanitarian situation still worse. We have also to attack the economic background of this crisis. As you know, there is also a migrant crisis there, 2.5 million Venezuelans abandoning the country, going basically to Colombia, but also to Brazil. And this poses a challenge for cooperation, regional and also global cooperation with the help of United Nations and many other international organizations that tackle the issue of migrant. We shared also our view on South Atlantic again as an important strategic region for Brazil. 95% of our of our trade flows through the South Atlantic Ocean. Security issues in that region basically refer to piracy and drug trafficking towards Africa and then to Europe. In '86, the United Nations General Assembly approved a resolution on declaring South Atlantic as a zone for peace and cooperation, and we, Brazil, want to keep this region, as I said, just like this. This is an important part of our strategic environment, and we deem it crucial that this remain, again, as I said, to become or to remain free from nuclear arms and weapons of mass destruction, as well as the military presence of other superpowers, global superpowers in that region. Basically, we want that region to remain free for trade, security, and cooperation. We also had the chance to discuss some key issues of the global agenda, especially disarmament and non-proliferation. Our own constitution in Brazil declares our country free from nuclear arms, free from the use of weapons of mass destruction. So we are prohibited from our own constitution to invest in nuclear arms. And also our South America, basically more than South America, Latin America itself, before even the establishment of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we had our own regional treaty. We call it Treaty of Tlatelolco, that is that declares Latin America a nuclear-free zone. So our engagement in this issue is regionally, and it is prior to the Non-Proliferation Treaty itself. Brazil is fully engaged in the negotiations leading to the 2020 review conference of the parties of the treaty, Non-Proliferation Treaty, but the prospects we recognize are very, very pessimistic. The nuclear threshold is being raised in the last years. Nuclear weapons arsenals are being modernized and expanded with flexible options, including low-yield capabilities, tactical capabilities. Those tactical nuclear weapons are deemed important for the preservation of the so-called credible deterrence. This is a bad thing for world peace. We see it like this. Last year, as you know, the United Nations General Assembly approved it, and Brazil was one of the first to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this treaty on nuclear ban worldwide has been facing a tough opposition of the nuclear states themselves. We consider that the nuclear weapon ban treaty to be an important step towards the achievement of Article 6 of NPT, and we would not like that the 2020 conference reproduces the same stalemate that happened in 2015. As you know, in 2015, there was no final declaration, and if the trend continues up to 2020, we will again face or finish a review conference of NTP with no final declaration. So 2 review conferences in a row achieving no concrete results, that would be a serious, that would affect severely the credibility of itself of the non-proliferation regime. On multilateral and cooperation, United Nations, I recalled yesterday, and I would like very much to repeat it today, one of my favorite quotes by Dag Hammarskjöld. We all are a big fan of Dag Hammarskjöld. He said, the United Nations was not created to take mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. This is a quite inspired quote. We have to be both idealistic and pragmatic when tackling global issues. We admire Sweden as a world humanitarian power and promoter of peace, as proved during its present mandate at the UN Security Council. Sweden was a strong player in those issues, human rights advocacy, debates, concrete debates on Syria and Myanmar, always defending and promoting humanitarian issues. But Brazil, we do feel that the United Nations Security Council needs a reform. The UNSC basically reflects the strategic environment of post-World War II, and we propose the inclusion of new permanent members coming from developing countries, because Latin America and Africa are underrepresented in the UN Security Council. We know also that you, Sweden, are a leader of the issue of women, peace, and security. This is a fantastic agenda, and we in Brazil are also promoting this agenda, and we look at Sweden as an inspiration. We proposed yesterday a closed cooperation between Sweden and the equivalent, we call it SECOPAB, so as to Sweden train Brazilian female military troops to work in peace processes. You have a very interesting and concrete experience on this, and we would like very much to learn from you. So this was one of the, in our point of view, the key suggestions and conclusions of our yesterday meeting. We also talked about the concept of crisis management, and we, as Brazilians, we prefer to work always under the edges of the United Nations Security Council. I mean, we take part in peace processes, peace enforcement, peacekeeping, peace building, but always under a concrete EU mandates of the United Nations Security Council. We do not favor the concept of crisis management outside the United Nations mandate. The European Union has been inviting Brazil to take part in some of those crisis management operations, but again, as I said, we favor only peace processes approved by the United Nations with three components. First, the consent of the receiving country. The receiving country must agree with the peace process. Secondly, the impartiality of the mission. Thirdly, the non-use of force except obviously in self-defense or to the accomplishment of the mandate itself. And we believe that some of those international crisis operations outside the United Nations do not comply necessarily with those three principles. We also shared our experience in Haiti after 13 years of peace enforcement and stabilization process in Haiti. Brazil sent through these 13 years 36,000 military personnel. They had a very interesting interaction with the local population. The female military troops were very active also, engaging with families, especially empowering women in the peace process. Basically, just to finish, we also discussed some very interesting bilateral topics. We discussed a lot about GRIPIN, the cooperation, strong cooperation on starting from this project, the spillover of defense projects. And finally, as you know, Sweden enterprises are very strong in Brazil, and we proposed the launching of a dialogue on the industrial base enterprises of this defense sector to strengthen their investments and with the help of government financing. So it was, just to finish and I conclude with this, it was a very, very productive and inspiring dialogue we had yesterday, and we look forward to strengthening and deepening our cooperation with Sweden. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for a very informative and interesting briefing on the Brazilian perspective on this cooperation. I think we all learned a lot about the Brazilian perspective from this. As you mentioned, there are common goals in the multilateralism, peace, disarmament, non-proliferation, and social justice. And another similarity is that we both live in regions where we would say we would thrive when our neighbors thrive. That goes very well for Sweden as well. But the difference is that Brazil is a big power in the region. Sweden is a small country. We both live close to other superpowers or big powers like US or Russia. And one thing that you did not mention that much about was your cooperation in the BRICS.
Okay.
Could you please tell us a little bit about the BRICS cooperation?
Excellent, thank you. In talking about BRICS, I should compare BRICS with another multilateral exercise, which is IBSA. BRICS is, as you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And IBSA is Brazil, South Africa, and India. Okay, for us, BRICS is especially an economic forum, not a security forum. So Brazil does not favor the discussion of defense and security matters within BRICS. What we see BRICS as an important space for cooperation outside other arrangements, global or regional. But we, for example, a couple of years ago, we launched the BRICS Bank, which is a big fund, a $50 billion fund, to invest in infrastructure, to invest in concrete projects. And so the BRICS agenda in Brazil will chair BRICS next year. The BRICS agenda is it's a broad agenda, but again, as I said, we see it especially as a forum for economic cooperation for development. On the other hand, as I said, IBS, you know, all three are developing countries, and yes, within IBSA, we put the security and defense agenda as one of the key aspects. For example, we have a very interesting cooperation on naval issues with the navies of India and South Africa. There are common exercises in South Atlantic, and IBSA besides the economic cooperation, also, it is a forum for us for discussing security matters. In BRICS, you have two big superpowers, nuclear states, and the three developing countries which are full democracies. So you have this, in the components of BRICS, you have this asymmetry, both as strategic power capabilities and as political organizations. And yes, again, we are very active within BRICS, but it's economy for us that matters.
So IBSA is for the defense and security, and
Yes.
BRICS for economic. Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
will ask you to come back a bit later.
Sure.
And I will introduce our third speaker. We have the pleasure to have Dr. Nan Tian, researcher from CIPRI's program on arms and transfers and military expenditure in South America and Latin America. Please give us a brief on the security situation in the region as a whole, and feel free to comment on what we've heard on the Brazilian and Swedish cooperation as well.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Felena and Ambassador Alessandro, for giving this very insightful presentation. As you all know, I'm neither Swedish or Brazilian. I'm actually South African. So hopefully I can provide a more neutral analysis of not only the regional standpoint, but also some insight into the cooperation between Sweden and Brazil. So, as you know, Brazil is generally seen as the hegemony within South America. And this cooperation comes at a time when many view South America as the most peaceful, one of the most peaceful regions in the world. Arms imports within the region is down by 38% over comparing the last 5 years to the 5 years prior. Brazil has seen its arms exports decrease by 20%, its arms imports decrease by 31%, and military spending in the region has been generally quite plateaued in the last 10 years. Brazil is currently the largest military spender within South America. In 2017, we estimated to be around $29.3 billion, 5 times more than the next largest spender, which is Argentina. So you can think of the context of where Brazil sits within South America in terms of the military aspect. And Embraer is the only South American arms company within what CIPRI has the top 100 arms companies within the world. Brazil currently is the 28th largest exporter of weapons in the world, whereas compared to Sweden, the 14th. So in terms of weapons moving in and out of this region, we see that South America has generally become a very stable, secure region with no civil conflicts or interstate conflicts. And so this cooperation is very much in a time where all of us at least from the research perspective, view South America as an extremely non-volatile region where we can look at to learn from certain aspects how the region got to such a peaceful state. And so, as what Ambassador Alessandro has mentioned in terms of this cooperation between Sweden and Brazil and the current modernization of the Brazilian armed forces, it should be done in a point of view that is more transparent and responsible, so such that it does not change the status quo within the region, that it does not develop into some military change in the military balance where certain issues of security dilemma might come about. And of course, the current problems we can think about within South America is mainly to do with economic concerns. We see what's happening with Venezuela, economics, economic growth, inflation, but even in Brazil, we've seen recent economic recessions in the country. So in terms of the problems-wise, it's more economics, rather quite secure from the military perspective. Let me give you some basic insight into what I think about in terms of the Brazil-Sweden security cooperation. And in terms of the gains for Brazil, I believe that there's a lot to be gained from Brazil in terms of its improvements in the arms export policies to learn from Sweden. The Brazil's national policy for the export of military materials, I think Sweden is known as the country which is relatively transparent, responsible, and ethical in its arms transfer policies. And thus Brazil can even improve on their own transfer policies through the cooperation with Sweden. For example, Sweden does not, of course, export to countries undergoing conflict, with countries with low human development scores. They push for increasing transparency within arms exports. So these are very much aspects that Brazil can even take on further, even though they already do. And it's very good to hear that Brazil has recently signed and ratified the Arms Trade Treaty. Again, Brazil can even improve on this with the cooperation in Sweden. Of course, one of the other main parts about this cooperation is the transfer of technologies. And when we think about transfer of technologies, it's not only the hardware or the transfer of the technology itself, but also the software aspect or the human development aspects, which I've seen from Lena's presentation that this has very much been a success between Sweden and Brazil. However, this question of how can Brazil become more of an international player within the UN and international sphere. And I think one example that Sweden has been historically been able to push forward was its cooperation with India and how it helped India join the United Nations Security Council on Missile Technology Regime. So hopefully this can be a potential step forward in terms of bringing Brazil more towards onto the international sphere within the UN. And finally, if we think about the other transfers of technology, economic development and socio-economic development is one aspect that I think is also one point that needs to be looked at. And of course, economic development is not only to do with company-specific, but more of, let's say, national, regional levels. And so I hope to see that this cooperation will lead to greater job creation, a spill-on of resources towards Brazil and the region as a whole. And if I think about gains for Sweden, I think the cooperation between Brazil and Sweden regarding the Gripen is very much a way for Saab and also Sweden to improve its reputation in terms of its arms exports, specifically the Gripen. As many of you know, there's been quite a lot of controversies in recent past with the Gripen and deals with South Africa, Hungary, and Czech Republic. So hopefully this deal will look as a way of improving the reputation of Saab in Sweden to prove that a deal can happen without potential any scandals on corruption, and rather it's actually a deal that's mutually beneficial to both countries. Also, the promotion of technology spin-offs for arms companies within Brazil, so that Brazil can become self-sufficient in building its own fighter aircrafts, and something that also would fulfill Sweden's obligations as ODA, since Brazil is eligible for ODA funding, and hopefully create a niche for the Swedish arms industry where it can provide the fourth generation fighter aircrafts to developing countries that cannot afford the more expensive fifth generation aircrafts or fourth generation aircraft seen provided by the US or France. And I think you said, is there time for a few? And I think if I look at some of moving forward, some concerns regarding this cooperation. It's important to note that the recent sale of 80% of Embraer to Boeing is a point where the transfer of technology is not transferred to Saab's competitors, and rather stays within Embraer and the defense sector itself. And that the economic and political concerns within Brazil is a point where whether Brazil can move forward with its current accusation program and the debt that it currently has taking on with the Gripen. And finally, the cases that I hope, and the community in the research and the public hopes that the cases of the corruption allegations within this current deal is proved false. We've seen recently with the testimony of the Saab CEO as well as the Prime Minister of Sweden that there is no allegation, they don't know of any potential cases of corruption or misdealing of resources. So hopefully that can provide to be the case that is truth and provide a potential for a future of successful cooperation between Brazil and Sweden.
Thank you, Dr. Tian. Now I will ask Ms. Bartelsson and Ambassador Candrea up to the stage as well to be a part of the Q&A. So there will be time for questions from the audience. So please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question, and my colleagues will help you with the microphones. I will start with Dr. Tian while you prepare. What you gave a very good view on the different gains from the two different countries on this cooperation. Can you say anything about, have you seen any challenges, common challenges that these two countries face in the cooperation?
I think the biggest one coming also from, of course, my experience with South Africa is the cases of corruption. And that the misuse of funds, especially for Brazil's case, developing country with current economic problems, that these allegations are proved false, and that actually this cooperation and these arms, let's call it arms deal, comes as a time where it's actually a legitimate, without any allegations of misuse of funds. If that's proved the case, then it's both a political and economic gain for both Sweden and Brazil within the world stage, because many of these deals are often seen to be quite shady at times. But hopefully everything's proved false.
Okay. And if I would like to ask Ambassador Candea, what do you say about the challenges?
The challenges
mentioned by Dr. Tian.
Okay. I think you highlighted in your presentation very interesting points, especially the transparency of weapons sales. You mentioned the 29.3 billion dollars as military expenditures, but 80% of this is payment of personnel. So investment and trade arms are a very small percentage of this. As regards the Gripen contract, it was totally a technical evaluation of the Air Force. This is one of the most important contracts we have. We discussed this yesterday. It is a paradigm shift in our aviation, and it's totally based on a purely technical and with no influence of other factors. So truly there will be no problem in pursuing with this program.
Thank you. Would you like to add something on your perspective? No. Thank you. Then I will let the audience have the first question here.
Thank you. Good morning. 3 questions. Santa Fe de Bogota and Brussels have formalized their relations regarding NATO partnership. Is there any plans for Brasilia and Brussels to do likewise? Number 2, the Lussophone cooperation. Portuguese-speaking Lussophonic countries in the world have a cooperation, and I would like you to expand a bit on that. And number 3, of course, we have a lot of Brazilian football players in the Swedish national leagues. When will a Swedish player be bought by the Corinthians?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Three quite different questions.
The third one is the toughest.
Yes.
No, thank you. About OTAN and Colombia and also Argentina and some other South American countries. As you know quite well, OTAN has a wide range of extra OTAN allies and partners. And Argentina was the first one in the 90s to join this network. And now Colombia, after the peace process, was eligible. And Colombia is traditionally a very close partner, military partner to the United States. So this gave both Colombia, Argentina, and other countries, for example, like Australia, Israel, Turkey, give those countries a better access to cooperation exchange, military exchange, and the possibility of buying equipment approved by OTAN, cataloged by OTAN. In Brazil, obviously, we have a cooperation with OTAN in terms of exchange of officials, but we do not, as I said here, take part in any operation of management of military crisis. There is no South Atlantic, there's no idea of building something like OTAN in the South Atlantic and in the region. As I said, we want the confidence within neighbors is a paramount value. And again, we see those neighboring countries getting closer to OTAN not as an indication of anything else than closer access to exchange of military knowledge and facilitation of buying some modern material and nothing else. Secondly, about the Portuguese-speaking countries in South Africa, as I said, in our strategic environment, the South Atlantic also comprises the western coast of Africa. Our cooperation with the speaking countries, Portuguese-speaking countries of Africa, as well as French and English-speaking countries, is of key importance for us. We have close cooperation, for example, in the Gulf of Guinea with the Cabo Verde, São Tomé and Príncipe, because there are important threats to security there in piracy and drug trafficking. And we've been helping the navy of those countries, Portuguese-speaking countries especially, to build themselves, to strengthen themselves. There's a very strong cooperation on naval forces. As for soccer, our soccer is not so good as it was in '58. So I wish Swedish players could play there too. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have the next question over here.
Okay. Thanks. Henrik Borgström, economy journalist. Very concrete, how many Brazilian professionals are working in Linköping for the moment, and how many family members are living there? And on the other side, how many Swedish people are working in Sao Paulo and around the Embraer's factory? And how many will it be maximum in the future?
Thank you.
I have those numbers. I know that we have many engineers, I would say from 200 to 300 Brazilian engineers working and making exchanges here in Sweden within the framework of the Gripen project. But I don't know how many are there Swedish, are there in Embraer in Brazil. Perhaps one of my colleagues from, the military attaché is Swedish.
Yes, there are around 20 families at the moment.
Okay.
Swedish in Brazil?
Yeah, most of them, or all of them in Gavião-Peixoto area.
São Paulo. And Brazilians here in Brazil, 200, 300 more.
358.
350, thank you.
Over the whole period.
For the whole period.
Also, there's slightly lower number, around 20, I think, also at the moment. Because it varies a lot over the time.
Yes.
Depends on the phase of the aircraft and during the production and perhaps go to in the beginning at the 100 engineers with families, and can say multiply +4, and more or less, and then now we're going to around 50, and it depends on the situation, goes and ups until to reach at the maximum 300 engineers with families.
Up to 2024, when the cycle finishes. It's a long term cycle.
Thank you. Then I will ask a question to all three of you to answer. This close cooperation between Sweden and Brazil, does it give leverage in other security policy relationships that you can use this leverage in any way? And how do you do that in that case? Start with Dr. Tian.
I think I can mention it would put Brazil hopefully on more of an international sphere, join more UN organizations, and also potentially make Brazil as the region, South American country for transfer of technology onwards. They will be able to sell weapons to other developing countries in cooperation with Sweden, hopefully to even outside Latin America, South America, to Africa, to Asia. So it definitely puts Brazil on a more international, or it's already in the international sphere, but it put even more on the international aspect in terms of developing high technology, fourth generation aircraft fighters.
Thank you. Ms. Bartelsson?
Yes, I fully agree that this generates lots of possibilities when we have a tight dialogue and can explain how we see on things and developments. We get stronger together in different areas. So of course, lots of positive effects from this.
Yes. As we discussed it yesterday, we'll be launching next year a dialogue.
Please a bit closer to the microphone.
Defense dialogue program with businessmen, so that we could explore the spillover effects of the defense industry and cooperation in many other areas. I would mention Navy and submarine technologies, joint aerospatial projects, spillover effects of the Gripen projects in ICTs applied to aviation, and many other possibilities in startups, prototyping, industrialization, marketing, exports, including financing and financing guarantee. So our wish is to expand the successful exercise we had in cooperation we had in the Gripen project to other defense industry projects with dual use, civilian and military purposes. So this is a winner cooperation we've been establishing with Sweden, and we want to expand it to other defense sectors.
Okay, thank you. I will have time for one more question. Is there any question from the audience? Yes, please.
So my name is Klaus Eimek. I work for the Swedish Defence Material Administration, and I'm involved in the Gripen program from the government side with Brazil quite a lot. And I have a question for you, Mr. Ambassador, that is regarding when I meet my Brazilian counterparts, we try to inform them about the Swedish security situation in a broader perspective. But I have problems to get their view on the political security situation. I'd like to hear your view. Once again, very short, what are the Brazilian security concerns, the major security concerns? Thank you.
As I said in the beginning of my presentation, we luckily perceive no military threat, immediate military threat, in the classic sense. I mean, state hostility from a neighboring country. Luckily, we do not have this since many decades. And we as a country invest politically to keep this South American region free from this type of perception of threat. Our security problems result basically from drug trafficking, arms trafficking, transnational criminality, which is not state-to-state classical war. And yes, we are investing in cooperation and integration on intelligence and joint operations with our neighboring countries, especially in the border zone. So basically, luckily, as you said very well, we remain a peaceful region, nuclear-free region, and integration and cooperation are there to strengthen this quality of the region. Politically stable. Again, those border criminality problems are the ones who concern us. This is why perhaps your Brazilian colleagues do not develop more on this, because there are no immediate threats. And let's work so that things may continue like this.
Thank you. And 1 hour is very quick passed by. And I thank you very much, all three of you, for sharing your perspectives on this cooperation with us. And we have all got a lot of more information on how close and how broad this long-time cooperation between Sweden and Brazil is. And we have all learned a lot, I would say. Thank you very much for coming here. And thank you for listening.